Welcome to the Support Raising Podcast, a ministry of VIA. I am your host today, Callie Davis. I'm part of the generosity team, and I'm excited to, on this podcast, bring you the best leaders and practitioners in our three areas of focus, which is spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and being fully funded. And we really hope that their insight will help you move forward in your partnership development. Today, we are launching the series, The Basics of Support Raising, and I'm so excited not to be joined by one guest, but three. We have Jenn Fortner, Jonathon Spaid, and Brooke Waresak. And I am so excited to give you a little bit of background of who these people are in case you don't know them. First, we have Jenn Fortner. She is with the Assemblies of God World Missions, and she has been such a seasoned support raising coach with over 10 years of experience. And right now is currently providing training and coaching to over 100 missionaries all at the same time, which always amazes me. If you've never heard of group coaching and how to do that well, I learned that skill from Jenn. Not that I do it to the same extent you do, but I mean, just a world of experience and then just so much growth that you've had a chance to be a part of so many people's stories is incredible. Also, the author of Financial Partnership Development, Fundraising Made Relational. Jenn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it, Callie.
Absolutely. Brooke is joining us from The Navigator. She is a ministry partner development training specialist, and she trains and coaches new staff and is focusing on helping them grow and develop their support team and launching successfully. She's been doing that for over 11 years. Brooke, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Callie. I'm glad to be here.
And last but definitely not least, we have Jonathon Spaid, who works with Focus, has been there for over 11 years as currently the Senior Manager of Mission Partner Development, where he trains and supports missionaries to develop mission partners. Jonathon, it is a privilege and an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you, Callie. It's an honor to be here.
Well, guys, this is going to be exciting. I have never hosted a group of people on a podcast before, so we're going to have a lot of fun, especially with today's topic. We just wanted to open our series of the basics of support raising, talking about the basic elements. So I get to kind of just hear from y'all's experience of what is the most core, the most essential when it comes to someone being able to succeed in support raising. And I think I want to start with the mindset, the perspective, because I know as we train people, that is where the fundamental foundation is built. So I think the question I want to open is, what is the most essential when it comes to the mindset and perspective of people who are raising support? And to get us started, Jenn, do you mind kicking us off?
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to be talking about this subject. I was actually talking to my husband about this a couple nights ago. And I was telling him, I was like, you know what, with missionaries that I train and coach, if they have the right perspective and attitude when it comes to support raising, I don't worry. Like, like, even if they're, not the best orator or speaker in front of a church service, or maybe they have a lack of skills or a lack of context, I never worry about them because I know that their perspective is going to lead them. I always say that perspective is around 90% of support raising is all in your perspective and your attitude. Perspective leads to attitude, which determines your action, right? You do what you do what you believe. So perspective again leads to attitude, which determines your action. You do what you believe. And I think that when we're talking about specifically with support raising, that attitude and that heart posture that everyone is a part of the Great Commission is so important and valuable. And when you're developing partners for your ministry, you're not just working to get to your ministry, right? This is a vital aspect, and you are already in ministry as you are connecting with individuals, as you are speaking at churches, as you are moving forward. So we're developing that team, not just for ourselves at that point. I really feel like there's I'll stop in just a second, but I'm passionate about this. I really do feel like there's a switch that gets flipped in people's hearts when they realize that it's not, and it's a from the head to the heart type of a thing. And it's not overnight, right? But it's asking the Lord to really help you with those, that distance between the head and the heart. But I really feel like there's a switch that gets flipped in our hearts when we realize that it's not about us and it's not about us raising our budget. It's about what the Lord wants to do. It's about the Great Commission. It's about the body of Christ living together. And I think the best thing that encapsulates maybe to, what is the mindset that people want to have? It's embodied, I believe really personally in Philippians, when Paul says in Philippians 4, um, not that I desire your gifts, what I desire is more be credited to your account. And I feel like that's a hallmark verse for me anyway, as I coach and train missionaries in the perspective, because I think it embodies that principle that it's not about us and it's not about the yeses and the nos that we get, but it's about whether or not I minister to the person in front of me. So, yeah. Yeah. Thanks for letting me be long-winded there. I'm sorry.
No, you're
Yeah.
good. Brooke and Jonathan, I would love you guys to chime in. What do you see as defining in the perspective of people that are successful? Well, how have you seen that?
Go ahead, Brooke.
Um, I was just talking to a new staff person in our organization the other day, and I was asked, when people fail at fundraising, what are the top reasons? And my only answer was when they don't believe that it's as essential as their ministry work is.
Oh, yeah.
So, right off of what Jen was saying, I truly believe that the mindset of this is as vital as my actual ministry work is what is making people successful. There are all kinds of logistical hurdles that they might have to get over. But if they don't believe this is the way to accomplishing the mission work that God has called me to, then they're not going to be successful. There's just not going to be that conviction needed that this is a vital piece of work in and of itself. It's not a necessary evil or just something to get checked off, but it is as critical as the people I'm doing ministry work with. So that was my kind of response to this staff person in particular. If you're going to be successful, this is it. So I really believe anyone getting started in fundraising has to first evaluate, do I believe that this is essential to my ministry work?
Yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with everything that Jen and Brooke is saying. The spiritual conviction about God's call and his heart, like fundraising almost in some ways doesn't make sense unless it's about the Great Commission. It's the only way that I would want to go and fundraise is if this is somehow advancing God's plan for salvation for the world. What I would add to it is, in addition, I think to seeing what I would say is fundraising is both a calling and a skill. It's a calling in so much as God has called you to do this. And so it's not, there's a transition I think that we need to make from seeing fundraising as a task, kind of like Brooke was saying, where it's like it's a necessary evil or it's a means to an end. It's something that I do, to seeing fundraising as almost a part of my calling or my identity, that I am someone who fundraises. Just like we would say, I'm a missionary. I'm a missionary who fundraises. I'm someone that God has called in order to invite others to invest their resources and therefore their hearts into Jesus's mission. Matthew 6:21 talks about where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And so we firmly believe that when someone gives of their resources, they're giving of their heart, and at least they're opening the doorway for God in order to reach in and grab their heart more because of their partnership with that. And one last thing that I'll say about it is when you see yourself as someone who fundraises, as fundraising is a part of your calling, it becomes a little bit easier to begin to incorporate it into your schedule. When we surveyed some of the best funded missionaries in our ministry, we found that those, maybe not surprisingly, but those missionaries who were successful had found a way to incorporate fundraising into their daily lives or their weekly lives. They were scheduled actions. Habits are things that you do so often that they become kind of a stable part of who you are. And so if you see yourself as someone who fundraises, as a fundraiser, and you develop the habit of fundraising and building that into your daily or weekly task, in addition to all of the other skills or tasks that you have to do, then it can become a stable part of who you are. That all of a sudden it's not something separate from the rest of my mission. It's just a part of who I am. And as I'm thinking about the people that God has called me to on mission and college campuses, for example, I'm also thinking about the people that God has called me to be on mission to on my support team.
Loving this.
Yeah, that's good, Jonathan.
You see, you guys have faced so much of the people like missing or losing some of that perspective, and you see the result of kind of that struggle. What have you guys done to help? Is there like as people are listening, like, yeah, I want that perspective. I want to grow that perspective. Wh- what can people do? What do you help people do?
Yeah, great question. I'm sure that what Jen had mentioned how so much of her coaching is perspective, and I would agree. And I'm curious about your experience as well, Brooke. But it seems like so much of the time, if you imagine like a tree, what we see in a tree is we see the trunk and the branches, but what's supporting the tree is the root system. And so those lies and limiting beliefs and that perspective and that worldview is like that root system that's underneath the tree. And so much of what we have to do as leaders within mission partner development is to help people kind of assess like what are the things, like how do they see fundraising, how do they see God's call, how do they believe that they are worthy of support, do they believe that people will invest. And so yeah, you have to spend a lot of time working through that and praying and going through kind of the scriptural foundation for all of these things. That's what I found, and I'm really curious what Jen and Brooke have found as well.
Yeah, Jonathan, it exactly that. It's the foundation that they start the fundraising journey on is what we found. And we believe that that starts with scripture. What does God say about fundraising? And the truth is, he says a lot and he says a little at the same time. There are a lot of different ways to fundraise, as exemplified in scripture, and they're not all one size fits all. Yet there are common threads throughout it. So we have, of course, Scott Morton is in our organization. We have some Bible studies put together by Scott, and we spend a hefty chunk, about a third of our training is spent with digging into the biblical foundations before they even start learning skills or getting involved with a coach. Let's dig into this. And in that, we address some specific questions of, how does this make you feel? What do you believe with this? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And dialoguing around the scriptural basis for fundraising before we ever touch a skill for it. And I have seen people go from, I just don't agree with this. I don't want to fundraise. I don't know if this is for me because of fundraising, to going through that Bible study. It's like, wow, I can't believe that God has designed all of this. Like, I am confident that he has called me and I am excited and ready to do this. Just complete transformations of mindset when they really focus on what has God said, not, how do I do this? And do I have enough people on my contact list? And maybe I'm not as winsome as I should be, but truly like, well, if God says that this is what I should do, then I think I can do this. So that scriptural foundation is what I think is critical to getting into the right mindset and believing that this is essential and part of the calling.
Um, Dang, I would say an aspect I see in kind of folding onto this perspective. I'd love to hear you. I think you're right. Where we start is the Bible. I think what I've also seen so helpful is coaching. Is if people start with like the building their good foundation, what helps them hold on to it is help. Not just being stuck in their own head trying to muscle through. Jen, do you have anything to speak to that?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that too. I think in tandem with a good, perspective comes with help, accountability, somebody reaching out. I think when I was first starting as a coach, my leadership would say to me often, like, gosh, just the ability that a missionary has to touch base with somebody and just talk about it is like huge, because sometimes we get in our heads a lot, particularly whenever we have to ask somebody a hard question. Just like a missionary is going to get, overseas, if they are in a country that, has no access to the gospel, they're sharing with a Muslim or whoever it is, and they are, sort of like in their heads about, did I do that right? Did I say this right? Did I articulate this well? And, am I doing it? Am I doing the thing? And I think that sometimes missionaries and, people that are raising full-time support just need to say, am I doing the thing? Am I doing this right? Is my heart right? Because there's a lot of perspective issues that are going to come up and boil up on a regular basis. And just having somebody touch base on a regular basis. And even if, I would just encourage too, like, even if you don't have a coach, get somebody that's going to walk alongside of you and just dedicate some time and some intentionality behind having some sort of accountability piece or somebody that's just going to be listening in. during this season is huge, huge. So
Yeah, it makes me think each one of us brings our own personal background and experiences as it relates to money and finances, or previous experiences with ministry and fundraising, to our current experience, and those things shape our perspective and worldview. And there's a great analogy that a great spiritual author used once about how a bird, even if it's chained by so much as a thread, will not be able to fly. And so we need to be conscious about kind of severing those threads, those lies, those negative perspectives that hold us back, so that we can soar to the heights that God is calling us to. And sometimes the problem is that we can't even see those ourselves. We actually need somebody else to be able to point those out and say, hey, I think your perspective is a little unhealthy here, or I want to challenge you to think and reflect on this. Um, I don't know about you, but I think the spiritual life is dynamic. It's like a treadmill. There's no standing still on a treadmill. You are either moving forward or you're moving backwards. But this process of conversion and evaluating our perspective and experiences takes work. And we're not meant to do the Christian life alone. We're meant to do it in community and in friendship with other disciples of Jesus. And so fundraising is no different, because I think many of us feel very alone in our fundraising, and we need other people to walk with us and to speak truth and life and encouragement to us as we engage in this very important work.
Absolutely. Jonathan, I so resonated with what you were saying. I think support raising can be one of the most isolating journeys or processes that a person goes through, and it doesn't have to be. So definitely spend all the time in the Bible, realize the biblical perspective of God, God's provision, how God talks about money, what it means to invite people with you to participate in the Great Commission. That's where we want everything to be rooted. And then to keep a hold of that, bring people with you, bring people into that process, into that journey. The community of people who are also raising support, people who have successfully raised support that can speak back to you, just encouragement friends that can speak life and say, it used to be you were talking about this is what God was saying about support raising and partnership. I don't hear you saying that anymore. What's changed? So powerful. I do want to mention, Brooke already mentioned Scott Morton. If you don't know who that is, he is one of the fathers of the current thought of how to partner and invite people into partnership. He wrote a book, Funding Your Ministry, years ago. It's phenomenal. But he also has a more recent book that's a devotional book, 40 Days in God's Presence for Your Fundraising, I think. Yes. So if you're just also wanting a practical tool to help you a little bit, that's something you can look up as well. I do want to shift a little bit to the practical aspect of support raising. So after we have a foundation in this perspective, which is going to help keep us grounded, what are the actual essential skills that you see as really vital for someone being able to successfully reach out to people, share what they're doing, and building a partnership team? What are the most critical?
I jumped in
I
first on
think,
the last one. So one of
yeah,
you guys wants to, you go for it, Brett.
I'll jump.
Yeah,
I'll
go,
jump. What do you guys catch me if I jump in the wrong direction?
on it. Totally on it.
You're good, Brooke.
I think two things come to mind immediately. The first being time management, which sounds so simple, but it really boils down for me to have a plan for each day, each week while you're fundraising. So yeah, you have a total budget number and what you're trying to shoot for, but how is that going to look each week, each day? Because there's no specific schedule to fundraising. There's so much variation in it. And when I see people successful, they start each day knowing what they're trying to do that day. They know who they're meeting with for appointments. They know who they're going to contact that day. And what goes right along with that for me is have someone hold you accountable to that. We need accountability as human for so many things. And fundraising is just the same. We already talked about the value of having that coach to help you as you process through the fundraising. It's the same in doing the work you say you're going to do. And of course, we want to honor any commitments we make and do that work, but have someone check in with you. I always encourage people, okay, if you don't have a coach, get yourself just a babysitter, a friend, someone you can say, hey, I'm going to make 10 phone calls today. Can you ask me at the end of the day how it went? Just anything so you know somebody else knows what you're trying to do, is thinking of you, hopefully praying for you, ask them to. but really having a plan for your days and your weeks and having somebody that you're talking to about that plan that's going to hold you lovingly accountable to doing that work are some of the top success factors for actually getting it started and getting it going and keeping it going.
That's a great skill. I would agree. Time management. One of the ones that I would add is the ability to pick up the phone and make the phone call. I'm not sure if you've heard of the idea of like the circle of control versus circle of concern, but if you imagine like two concentric circles, one within the other, the outside circle is your circle of concern. There are all kinds of different things that we are constantly concerned about. When it comes to fundraising, we're concerned about, will this person say yes? Will this person say no? Will they reject me? Will they like what I'm doing? Will they like me? Will they give $100 a month? Will they give 5,000? Will they not give anything? The list goes on. But the inside circle is our circle of control, things that we can actually influence. We cannot do anything about whether or not someone will give or how much or when. But what we can do is focus on the things that are within our influence, things like picking up the phone and making the call, or things like planning my week and following up with my accountability partner, asking for help when I need it. Those are things that we can actually do. And I just like level the playing field and say, don't even worry about what they're going to say. Your only job is to pick up the phone, call people, and get in front of them to present your ministry vision and invite them to partnership. That's it. Don't worry about anything else. And the thing that happens is if you focus on your circle of control, then you actually grow it, and it becomes bigger, and you become more successful over time. So pick up the phone and persistently call people, not just once, not twice, not even 3 times. You might have to call them 11 times or 20 times, but don't give up. And if you stay faithful to that, I believe that God will provide the fruit as a result.
That's good. Yeah. Can I?
Jonathan,
Oh, go ahead, Callie.
I'm going to jump in real quick.
Yeah.
I'm not going to open a can of worms, but Jonathan, I'd love a 10-second thought for when people say phone calls don't work anymore.
That's a great question. Do phone calls work? Yes, the short answer is they work. Phone calls actually have a very high success rate or conversion rate in terms of getting the appointments once you get a hold of people. The problem is that you actually have to get a hold of them. And typically phone calls it takes more time to get a hold of them over the phone. There's been some research done that shows that on average, it actually takes about 11 phone calls prior to being able to get a hold of someone. Of course, there's other ways to get a hold of them. I think that they are also effective and can work, but the phone call is tried and true. And I would say don't throw out the baby with the bathwater just yet. You can utilize other methods, but the phone call is tried and true. You just have to recognize that it's going to take a lot of time. But once you get them on the phone, you have a very high chance of actually converting that into an appointment.
So much more can be said of that, but I know I at least wanted to get like a little touch on that. Jen, what were you about to say?
Well, just to jump on that just for a second, I think Callie, you and I had a good discussion about that at one point, and you were talking about, hey, sometimes things just don't work. Translate on the text message that they do, and I'm like, there's spaces where you need to make a phone call, and this is one of them. And I think that's just a good point. And I think you used the analogy. You probably still use this analogy, and I love it. I love it. Where it's like if a neighbor's dog died on a street that was, your neighbor, you're not going to text that person and tell them about that information. You're actually going to call them on the phone because that's an important phone call. There's a lot of things in life that make more sense on the phone than they do, than they do on text message. And this is definitely one of them. So it's like a negative, that's a negative, but I think you get what I'm saying there. And I would add to the conversation with some of the things that really, stand out as skills that people need is one of the things kind of that I'm going to maybe bring together a little bit with what Brooke and Jonathan, you guys have already said. It's just that tenacity or diligence piece. And those are sort of words that incorporate like what you both said. But that's like my number one thing too, is like, hey, but I would add to that conversation too. I think that at least for me, whenever I was starting out with my support raising, I thought I had to be somebody that I wasn't. There's a lot of people out there that maybe struggle with, a communication piece, or they struggle with being organized and they're a little, scatterbrained, or maybe they're really bad at procrastination. I hear that all the time. I procrastinate. And I would say, recognize who you are, and what you bring to the table. And then also find the accountability pieces for the places that you are not diligent, where you're not like, maybe if you're not necessarily a diligent or, tenacious person, I think that there's, accountability piece to sort of counteract that. So know yourself in support raising, say who you are, but challenge yourself to really do this well. And I think knowing yourself in the midst of this season is really helpful, to kind of plug those holes. So I would say, yeah, to add to that, diligent and sort of tenacity piece is knowing yourself, but also, hey, just for anybody that's listening to this saying, you guys are all cheerleaders. This is nice, but this is not for me and not easy. I think we've all worked through our own challenges with it. And to say, like, these things are really like the principles that actually get you along. This perspective, again, and diligence and tenacity. And to add to that, one last thing, I would say being a learner, just in general, you never go into a job for the first time and don't like take the time to really understand what it is that you're doing. So taking the time to read, to read some of the books that are out there on support raising, to really get into the materials once you do have a training in front of you and taking it seriously, it's going to go a really long way if you just spend the time learning how to do it. So
Yeah,
Love. Go ahead, Jonathan. What were you about to jump in with?
yeah, really briefly, I just wanted to share like something cool that we learned about in Focus
mm,
recently, a kind of a research data point to back up or tie in some of the things that we've been talking about related to the practical skills, but also the perspective. We have our missionaries. This is going to sound like a paid advertisement from from Via Generosity. This is not a paid advertisement. Okay, we partner with Via Generosity and their foundations program in order to help our missionaries do kind of the spirituality and prep work in preparation for our training before they go fundraise. And then we give our missionaries about 6 weeks to fundraise prior to their placement on college campuses. What we found is that missionaries who actually complete the foundations prep work, who work on their perspective, who spend time reading scripture, who spend time praying and thinking through the foundation of all of this and God's call and plan for salvation, their output in terms of the number of phone calls, number of appointments, and even in terms of the number of funding is about 20% higher than those who don't complete it.
mhm,
Now, you don't have to partner with, Via Generosity and the Foundations program, but I think that just points to the reality that if you aren't willing to put in the time and work on that perspective and do that biblical basis, then you can't expect to be as successful in fundraising. And even if you know how to pick up the phone, even if you know how to manage your time, even if you know all those other skills that you have to know, it's still it's directly related to your success.
mhm.
Uh, that's a good word. The skills do not replace your perspective.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, guys, we are nearing the end of our time. And I just want to know, could you each give us maybe one thought of encouragement, recommendation for our listeners before we wrap up?
Yeah, I'll jump in and I'll just share, kind of what Jen was saying in terms of the being willing to practice and develop a skill, to recognizing that it's a skill that you can grow in. Fundraising, I would argue, is both a calling and a skill. So it's a calling, like I said before, in the sense that God has called you to be someone who raises money for the kingdom. That is awesome. That's a source of evangelization and conversion for other people, and of course, it sustains you in your work as well. In addition, it's a skill that you can grow in. And so as you approach fundraising and it seems really scary, just see it as something that you can practice. Imagine that you're an athlete and you're just practicing. That's how you get better. It's the same thing with fundraising. You show up and you keep practicing. You try something, and if it didn't work, you go back to the drawing board and you evaluate it and you refine it and you just keep practicing. And if you're persistent, if you have that tenacity, like Jen was saying, and you continue to have that practicing mind, continue to trust in the Lord, I'm confident that God will provide for you and that you will be able to sustain mission for a very long time. So that's my encouragement. See it as a calling, and see it as a skill that you can develop. So have a practicing mind towards fundraising.
Yeah. I think for me, like just a final like quick thought, be yourself, be who you are. Um, and I think get really clear and passionate on your calling. and clear that this is biblical, that this is a part of it, that this is ministry, that this is a vital aspect of your ministry. And again, all of that stuff is going to lead into your action. And again, I think we've all kind of said it in different ways, but the people that are doing this well are the ones that have the perspective and the attitude and the heart posture behind it. And you can get everything else, but you can't teach somebody how to have that perspective. That comes from the heart. You can teach everything else when it comes to support raising. You can practice, practice, practice and get better and grow. But that's the one sticking point. That's the thing. That is the thing I think that encapsulates all of it and wraps it all up and makes it possible is whenever you see this as ministry. So,
Yeah, I think I would add to both of those fabulous thoughts that fundraising is as personal and specific as our own walks with the Lord are. Like there are universal principles and skills, but when it comes to building that conviction and trusting in that calling, take the time with the Lord, take the time with the scriptures, take the time with mentors to really understand your place in that and to understand that if God has called you to the ministry work, he's also called you to the fundraising work. And what is that going to look like for you? There's so many unexpected blessings along the road of fundraising that are so further beyond just the money. You're gonna raise funds for your ministry work, but there's so much more that can come from it. So open your heart to the blessings the Lord has in that and the journey and the faith and all of the growth that's going to come as you lean into and embrace the fundraising journey through building all that foundation.
This just came to my mind. I just want to share this really quick. What you said, Brooke, about how if God's called you to this mission and he's calling you to fundraising is so true. What I would add to that is when we have missionaries who fundraise, we literally can't send you alone. So when God calls you, he actually doesn't just call you. He's actually calling 40 to 50 to 100 of people like friends, families, people that you don't even know to this mission as well. So don't think about it just as like, oh, this is my call that God's calling me to mission. Yes, that's true. But he's also calling all these other people as well, because we literally cannot send you alone. We have to send you supported by a ministry team of praying and giving individuals. And so your task is to trust the Lord and go find out who else God is calling to this mission with you. And I think that has been something that's been so encouraging to me when I'm tempted to doubt or feel alone, to recognize I'm not alone. God's inviting other people to support me in this work. I just have to go find out who they are.
Such good, valuable input, guys. Thank you so much. I know today was a really broad overview. We barely got to dig even an inch below the surface on so many different areas. So if you're listening, I encourage you, stay tuned for the rest of our series. But also, if you're immediately wanting a little bit more, you're wanting, how can I know more, hear more, read more? Please do know we've got over 200 other podcast episodes that many of them dive into each of these topics with a number of different guests. We have articles that you can read and search through to find something that really does hit more specifically on one of these topics. So we don't want to just leave you here with the 10,000 foot view. There is so much more that you can learn, can listen to. I know just even the organizations represented here have a lot of resources. So please don't think this is it. But thank you again, Jenn, Brooke, Jonathon. It has been an honor to have your experience, your expertise join us today. And listeners, thank you for joining us as well. We hope you are a little bit more encouraged and a little bit more equipped, and we hope to see you again. Have a great day.